one reason for this variation is of course contact that Romani is in with other languages. So it was necessary to set out and collect a bit more data with a very short period of time between the prayer book and the letters that were addressed to Archduke Joseph in Romani.
Welcome to a conversation with Romani linguists. My name is Anastasiia. I'm a promoter of Romani language, history, and culture.
And I'm Yaron, and I'm a linguist specializing in the Romani language.
In this series of interviews, we talk to linguists working on the Romani language. We are eager to know how they became interested in deeper research into the Romani language, what challenges they faced on their professional path, and what fascinating stories and discoveries they had. And today we are pleased to introduce our guest, Márton András Baló. Márton Baló is a research fellow at the Hungarian Research Centre for Linguistics in Budapest. Márton, you're very welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me on this podcast.
Thank you for agreeing to join us and to share your experience in your work in the field of the Romani language. And we have the first question for you. Could you tell us, please, about your childhood, where you grew up, what school you attended?
Okay, my childhood, yes. Well, I mostly grew up in Hungary, in Budapest, in Hungary. And well, I went to a nice primary school in the neighborhood where we lived. But it's funny you're asking, because as a matter of fact, one of my very best friends that I have from that period is a Romani boy, and we actually grew up in the same building. So so that was my first encounter with Romani. So yeah, it was a good thing to ask this question, because otherwise, yeah. So in our neighborhood we had some Romani families, mostly families that had recently come to town from the countryside, from various locations in the countryside. And as I've said, this one particular boy, well, is a man now of my age, obviously, became one of my best friends. But then, you know, at the time I was not into Romani culture or language as such. I was just trying to have fun and enjoy myself, and we had some really good time together.
By the way, what was your favorite subject at school? Do you remember?
My favorite subject at school? Well, yes, I think it was chemistry. Chemistry, because
Oh, interesting. Completely different. Not
yeah. As a matter of fact, I almost became a chemist. So yeah. So when I went to university, I enrolled in both departments, so both the science and the social science department. But then I eventually went this way, so language and linguistics. But chemistry had been an option for quite a while.
I think that might explain your interest in particular components of the chemistry of language, but we'll come to that a bit later.
Yeah. Could you tell us, please, more about your studying at university? How this years?
Yes. So when I went to university, that was the first thing my first major was English. I had a background in English. I grew up bilingual, and so it was the kind of thing that I thought might be something that would suit me, and then I studied at Eötvös Loránd University in Hungary, at the Department of English for 4 years, I think, which then I finished later. But that's when I started to become interested in linguistics. We had some good teachers there who introduced us to various aspects of modern linguistics, and then and there was an option to take up linguistics as a separate course. Basically, it was a separate major at the time, so it was a 5-year university course, which actually goes back to the early 90s. So this is the theoretical linguistics department at the university, and it was actually founded here not in this building, but in this institute for linguistics by enthusiastic researchers who wanted to teach linguistics, modern theoretical linguistics, after the events of the late 80s and early 90s. So the change in the political system, and because until that point, strands of modern linguistics had not really been available, or just very in a very limited way behind the Iron Curtain, and so that was a time when they thought it was time to start something like that, and then they submitted a proposal to the I think it was some kind of branch of the Soros Foundation, and they were the ones who basically supported the foundation of the department. Their only prerequisite was that a university had to host the project, and so that's how they found the university that I also attended later. And this has been the case ever since. Well, the Soros Foundation does not provide any financial support anymore, but the cooperation between the university and our research institute has been ongoing ever since. And so that's how I found myself in this building when I took up theoretical linguistics, because the whole thing took place here, so not in the main building of the university. And that's how I got more deeply into linguistics at the time, theoretical linguistics at the time. Romani came later.
Wow. And I have a question about your current work, where you work right now. But you mentioned that you grew up as a bilingual. May I ask what languages were spoken in your family when you was a child?
Yeah, well, Hungarian was spoken in my family, but English was spoken outside the family. So a significant part of my life that I spent was in the expat community here in Hungary, which was flourishing at the time, and my parents got me into that community, some way or another, when I was really young, and so that's how I I picked up English while we actually spoke Hungarian at home. So.
I see. So Hungarian and English, and actually you speak these languages since you child. Very nice. Okay, thank you. And what about your work? So you said that you found yourself in that building. Is it literally in the same building you continue working?
Yes, it is actually. Yes, it's literally this very building. Because by the time I took up linguistics, the research institute had moved to this building. In the 90s, it was in a different building, but and before. And so yes, I found myself in this building with really listening to really interesting stuff and interesting lecturers and teachers. And then when I was looking for a topic for my thesis, so that's when things began to change slightly.
And was that moment when you got interested in Romani?
Yeah. So I'll come to that in a minute. So
okay.
So I had been interested in Yiddish. I took up a Yiddish program at the university, which was offered there at the time. Yiddish philology and that sort of thing, film, culture. So many things were included. There was a kind of a package, a small package, but the only available thing at the time as far as Yiddish was concerned. And I was thinking, and then I went. I also met some people who still spoke Yiddish. There was a Yiddish club. That was the early 2000s. Yeah, so quite some time ago. And there was no one in my family who spoke Yiddish in any way whatsoever. But there was this club. There were a few people, and my teacher took me there. One of my Yiddish teachers took me there, and so I was kind of interested whether I could do anything about Yiddish. But then I had a supervisor, so I had already picked a supervisor, Laszlo Kálmán, who was a teacher at this department, and I asked him whether he thinks it was a good idea to do something like that, and then he said it is a good idea, but on the other hand, there are very few Yiddish speakers. There are very few Yiddish speakers in this region. So if I want to do something in this region or in this country, then and I have some sort of interest in minority languages, then why not look into Romani? Because at the time when I was going to write my thesis, so to say, it had been under-researched in Hungary. Yeah, so it had already enjoyed this more international revival. I mean, the interest in Romani, of course. That was about 15 or 20 years ago when I was looking for a topic. But in Hungary at the time, there was not much about Romani, and even less in terms of modern linguistic approaches. And so then, yeah, I said, yeah, okay, why not?
Makes sense.
Yeah. I've got a colleague in Vienna who now works in Vienna, and she's been doing research on Hasidic Yiddish recently. But at the time, it was not something that was in the forefront of the of linguistic research. Hasidic Yiddish is something that is very interesting in various aspects, both historical, linguistic, and synchronic terms. But at the time, I was not aware of that at all. And as I spoke to her, or when I spoke to her, she told me, so it had not been really researched in terms of linguistics and grammar at the time. So it's different now. But now I'm really okay with Romani. So I sometimes dabble in some Yiddish, but only as as more of an outsider in terms of linguistics. So that's how I came by. That's how Romani came by.
Very interesting. And now it's very it's good to dig deeper into the Romani language. And now I'd like to give a floor to Yaron, please.
Yeah, so no, that really is fascinating, and we've known each other for a long time, and one doesn't always at conferences and project meetings have the opportunity to hear about all of these pathways. So I'm learning so much about you now, having known you for so many years, and it really is fascinating. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. Your interests have been mainly in phonology and in morphology. If I'm right, and what people might consider the kind of the structural core of language, or to go back to the analogy of chemistry, the chemistry of language. But I think outside of linguistics, maybe it's fair to say that most people think of language as words, as a lexicon. So when people kind of in a popular perception of language. So maybe we can start by explaining a little bit to our viewers who are not linguists. What is phonology and what is morphology? What do they do? In what way are they the chemistry of language?
Yes, well, morphology is after all related to words. So of course it is not, strictly speaking, it's not about the lexicon itself, but the structure of words. So it focuses on how words are put together in especially in languages that have all these little components that that one can put together and create new words or new forms. And yes, and in one way or another, phonology is also connected to words, because words consist of sounds, and the way sounds can be put together to form words in various languages is one of the main topics that is studied by phonologists.
So phonology is the study of sounds, and morphology is the study of forms that attach to words, or that put together words. And in what way is Romani interesting in regard to those two phenomena? What are some particular things that Romani displays in phonology and in morphology that have attracted your attention to study?
Yeah, so when I first started to look at various aspects of Romani, then what first struck me was the amount of variation. So the variation means that the same function may be represented by various different forms, to put it in a nutshell. Yeah. So word forms or smaller units that might be different but mean the same thing, and maybe attached to certain words but not others, or maybe there are these little components that maybe that there are more of, and maybe attached to the one and the same word. Yeah, so that is what variation implies. And of course, much later on, I also had the opportunity to realize that this variation, one reason for this variation is of course contact that Romani is in with other languages, so that can be a source of different forms and the way they attach to words, and so basically that was the first thing that struck me, both in terms of verbs and then later in terms of nouns. Yeah.
Many in Hungary, much of the population who define themselves or are defined by others as Tsigani, so as gypsies, don't actually speak Romani, and we know that has some historical reasons. There were policies of oppression toward the language. But among those that do, probably one of the largest group are the Lovari or Lovara Roma, who speak what we call the Lovari dialect of Romani, and you've worked on that quite extensively. What can you tell us about Lovari Romani in Hungary? Who speaks it? Where? What are its particular characteristics?
Well, it's interesting because when I tried to approach this whole thing from the perspective of variation, then of course I realized that, and my supervisor also told me that in order to be able to say more about variation, we need data. So we need samples of the language, and preferably as much as possible, as much data as possible, data from the same variety. So that data from one particular variety of the language, because if we look at various different varieties, that's also interesting, and there can also be variation, but that's a different kind of variation, because one group uses this kind of little thing that they attach to words, and another group uses a different thing, but that's fine because they use that within their groups. But if there are more of these little things, little components within the same group, then that's another kind of variation, and that can be affected by various other reasons, not just the fact that they speak a different variety. And so it was necessary to set out and collect a bit more data, because we had some data. József Ekerdi was a famous linguist who collected quite a lot of material in various dialects, various varieties of Romani in Hungary in the 60s, 70s, and in the 1980s. But first and foremost, he focused on folk tales. Yeah? So that was his primary focus. He collected tales, which was a good way of recording language material at the time. And as I'm saying, various dialects, not just Lovari, but various other dialects that were spoken and are still spoken in Hungary. So we thought we should collect a bit more data, just at least a bit more to verify whether what we see is actually present or not. And then we set out to collect data. I had some experience, fieldwork experience in doing some fieldwork for the Romani morphosyntax database and the linguistic atlas of Central Romani as well. So I was not without experience, but of course it was something new, yeah, to set out and go about doing one's own project. That was a bit different.
And how did you do that? How did you find speakers of the language, and how did you approach them?
Yeah, so one of the first people that I of course found was my old friend from primary school, whose family happened to be Lovari speakers. So from the east of Hungary, they came from the east of Hungary. So that was a good thing because I could rely on him. So when I was writing my MA thesis, then I relied heavily on his mother, who is a native speaker, and another person that I came in contact with was Silvia Lakatos, who is a teacher at the University of Pécs, where there is a Romani Studies department. And she is also a native speaker of Lovari, and so she could also help me verify data that I had seen previously. And later, when I was trying to write my PhD thesis, then we tried to collect more data, not just two people, but more data. And then of course I asked them to help me get in touch with other people that I can talk to. And then I had prepared my own questionnaire for the first time, and then that was a sort of thing that I went to places, went to people, met people that they had introduced me to, and they were very, very helpful. Now there was another way of doing this, which I also enjoyed a lot, although it was much less reliable, because I just looked up the National Minority Council people that I could, and then I could check, the number of inhabitants in various villages over Hungary, all over Hungary, and I could then start to try to guess whether I could find some speakers there or not. So I went to quite a few places in Hungary. So if you imagine Hungary, which is actually behind me on a map, at least, yeah, almost all, you can see almost all of it. Then what I focused on at the time was a northeast southwest belt within Hungary, which there is a reason for that. There's a geographical reason for that. The southeast of Hungary is taken up by the Great Hungarian Plain, and there are very long distances. There can be very long distances between villages and towns there, and the northwest is another plain, the Little Hungarian Plain, where the situation is somewhat similar. So I decided to visit places where I could find more villages in a cluster, and then they could, if I found someone, he might have been able to recommend someone else as well in the neighboring village or two villages away. And so, but then of course it's sometimes, well, sometimes, yeah, it sometimes happened that there were no speakers at all, so, but this kind of, this kind of thing. So yeah, sometimes people say, oh yeah, definitely they all everybody speaks there, and then it turns out that nobody actually speaks the language.
Is Lovari then spoken in particular regions in Hungary, or is the population spread all across the country?
Yes, it seems that it is quite widely spread all over the country. We would like to do some more field work. That depends on funding, really. But I would like to do some more field work in those regions that we had to omit previously. To confirm that there are actually speakers, but I think there are. So it seems that there are, as I said, PH is in the southwest of Hungary, and there are speakers, as I've mentioned. And this friend of mine, the family of this friend of mine, comes from the northeast of Hungary, and there are speakers there, and there are speakers in between. So we found quite a few speakers. We recorded some 90 something.
And are there regional differences? Is there the Lovari dialect of the north or the Lovari dialect of the south? Have you found any geographical differences, or is geography a much relevant factor?
This is still under review. So because we focused on this particular on some particular phenomena of variation that I was referring to, verbs and nouns, and we haven't got round to processing the data to a kind of dialectological extent, so to see whether there are any significant differences between people who live in the northeast and people who live in the southwest. So that's still an important thing, especially because there is a long held view, so to say, about dialects that belong to the same big group as Lovari, because there are other dialects that are called Vlach-Romani dialects, and there's a long held view in Hungary that there are various other, not just a few, not just 3 or 4, but at least 10 more varieties that are spoken in Hungary, and that comes from the researcher who was a self-taught researcher who was actually referred to as the blonde gypsy. He was not a Romani man. Kamil Erdős was his name, and he did a lot of research among the Romani people in Hungary in the 50s. And he dressed up as a kind of gypsy, and he was a Romani person. Yeah, so he tried to blend in, so to say, and he was very good at that. I as far as I know, and he was well respected by various Romani communities all over the country, and he came up with this kind of classification, and I'd be really interested to find out whether this actually still holds, or at least held at the time, or what. But that needs more research.
So how do you recognize the Lovari dialect? Can you give us like 3 or 4 forms? I mean, you speak of data. Data is obviously the shape of word forms. That's what you record and that's what you evaluate. So what are, like, 3 or 4 examples where you can say, if this occurs in a dialect, then it's probably Lovari, that are typical of Lovari?
Well, what shall I mention?
Or maybe just some words that they use that are typical, that you know that if somebody says that, then you can call it Lovari.
Yeah.
Or do you actually ask speakers, is it really dependent on what they call their own dialect?
Hang on a sec. Let me just gather my thoughts to make sure I don't I didn't say anything that
No, it's all well, we can make it maybe simpler so you don't have to look things up. So if somebody says, if you ask somebody what kind of Romani do you speak?
yeah. So
And they say Lovari, and then another person somewhere else also tells you they speak Lovari, is it likely that they're going to speak pretty much the same? Or are the names of the dialects actually fluid and volatile?
Well, that's what we don't quite know yet. So as I'm saying, yeah, okay. So there are some typical things, but the so probably the difficult thing here is to differentiate between dialects within this Vlach group, because as you know, there are some features that really stand out as the copula and other features that stand out as particularly typical of Vlach dialects. Yeah, so the s sound in certain positions where other dialects might have the h sound. Yeah, so that sort of thing. But the more difficult question here is to see whether Lovari is different, and to what extent is different from other dialects that might be classified as very close to Lovari. And this is what we're still kind of uncertain about. In terms of phonology, yeah. So you've got in many dialects you've got chai for girl. In Vlach dialects they say she. Yeah.
But that's not just Lovari, that will be all the.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm thinking of in Hamburg where I worked, and there's many Romani speakers and very different dialects. There is a group of people who refer to themselves as Lovari, and others refer to them as Lovari, and probably originally they came from Hungary some generations ago. And one of the things that people associate with the Lovari is if other people say, for example, chacho for correct, chacho,
yeah,
the Lovari are known to say cha-cho. So they pull the first syllable. Now, that's typical of Lovari outside of Hungary. In Hungary, maybe it's typical of all the Romani dialects, or is it distinctive?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I think the long first syllable and the stressed long first syllable is something that is probably more typical of all the dialects in Hungary. So
that's what you were alluding to before when you said some changes are due to contact.
Yeah, exactly. So
contact with Hungarian that influence.
Yes, if it's the same contact language as in the case of Hungarian, then it might affect different Romani varieties in a similar way. Now, that was something I wanted to. Oh yes, in terms of Lovari. Now that you're asking, I'm just collecting my thoughts. Another interesting thing, I think, in terms of internal variation, and that's where I can relate to some of our earlier discussion, is that there are special little elements that are used in Romani when when a word from another language is borrowed. And in the case of verbs, for instance, there is a variety of these, or there is a range of these elements in Romani that are selected by different varieties according to historical and geographical distribution. And what we find is that the Austrian Lovari use a different element to adapt or to insert loan verbs, different from the one that they use in Hungary, the Lovari use in Hungary.
I want to just touch on another question before we start bringing the conversation to a close. Romani is mainly an oral language. We think of it as, it's not so much a written language. There is some writing, but it's fairly recent and limited to not many people and doesn't go back a long time. And for us as linguists, when we try to investigate the history of the language, that's quite a problem, because unlike other languages, we can't go back and draw and do what's called philology. So draw on documents and texts that were written many centuries or generations ago, and extract from that and look at how the language has changed over the generations. The most we can do is do, like some of the work that you're doing, is comparing dialect forms in different places and try and reconstruct, if they're different today, what might have been the common point of departure. But that's a kind of an analytical exercise. But one of the very unique aspects of your work among the Romani linguists is that you actually have done some philological work on Romani. You've looked at 19th century sources, a prayer book in Romani, and letters that were written in Romani, which were very exceptional at that time. And today people use Romani on social media, of course, and electronic communication. But back then it was truly exceptional. Can you tell us a little bit about that work? How did you discover those texts? And how did you work with them, and what were the insights that you gained from that?
Yeah, so this is a short prayer book that you were referring to, and it was indeed published in the late 19th century, the second half of the 19th century, when a famous a well-known Romani musician thought it would be high time to provide the Romani people with prayers in their own language. It was an early form of activism, if you want to call it that. And another important person in the history of Romani linguistics in Hungary was Archduke Joseph, a member of the Habsburg family, who had a really keen interest in the Romani language, and he learned to speak Romani, and he also exchanged letters with some of his Romani friends and their relations. And thankfully, those letters were not lost. They were actually published. They have been published on various occasions in different editions. And I suppose this is one of the main things that that is important for a linguist, to make observations, to find things in text or in spoken language that strike him and or her, and that's what happened in this case as well. So we found these letters, and we saw that as I'm saying, these letters are quite old. coming from the 19th century, but they were also republished not long ago. So yeah, so the material was there in front of us, and it had been there for quite a while. So apparently, what the work of a philologist or a linguist involves is look at data and sources and material over and over again, because what you can't spot for the first time might stand out for the second time. And so that's what happened. So when we read these letters, then we noticed that the gender system, which means the masculine, feminine way of forming words. Yeah, so these two big genders that exist in many languages, was not really as it should have been in these letters. So we saw that all those markings that was supposed to be mark out the two different genders were were not there, or were mixed up, and then that's when we went back to this earlier source, the prayer book, to double check whether this system is still intact there, and we found it was. And so that's when we started to compare the two and attempted to draw a kind of timeline and what might and how, not exactly how, but what happened. Yeah, what happened to this two-way gender system that exists in Romani in a few decades time, basically. So this was a very short period of time between the prayer book and the letters that were addressed to Archduke Joseph in Romani.
Okay, so the language had actually changed in that time, or maybe it was different people using what you referred to earlier as variation. So different people use different forms, perhaps, in different places.
Yes, it could have been, but it could have been that as well. But the good thing was that the prayer book was written, as I've mentioned, a famous Romani musician, and the letters were written by his relatives,
Right.
brother and daughter. So
so it is the timeline.
Family.
Right.
Same family.
That is really, really fascinating. We're going to start bring this to a close now. I'll hand over back to Anastasiia for a couple of concluding questions.
What a fantastic research. For me, it was completely new information about the long vowel sound, because before that conversation, I was sure that this it's typical only for Lovari dialect, but that other dialect, Romani dialect in Hungary, that it's typical. It's very new. It's very interesting. And thank you. Okay, having said all that, I would like to ask you, what do you consider to be your major discovery?
Yes, well, I've been thinking about this question, and I've come to realize that, as far as I'm concerned, I always feel that the most recent one is the greatest one. So so when I was doing this when I was doing the research into variation and change and that sort of thing, then I thought, oh, that was really some contribution to Roman linguistics and maybe even general linguistics. But now we've been, for some time, we've been working on something else. The language use of another group of Romani people who live in Hungary and who don't necessarily speak the language anymore, the so-called Romungro group, and the way they use Hungarian, so the way they speak Hungarian, and what can be said about that and what is typical of that. And now I think this is the greatest thing, because this is again something that hasn't really been looked at least in Hungary. So yeah, so I hope that is a satisfactory answer.
Amazing. And what do you still want to achieve?
Well, yeah, we have touched upon contact and dialects. So that is something I would really like to cover in more detail, and maybe on a larger scale, because as Yaron pointed out, it can be very interesting to look at different varieties in contact with the same language, and what happens then. And if we want to look at that, then we need some more documentation. So that's something that I would really like to do in future, if it's possible.
We wish you success in your further work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Interview.
Thank you very much for your time and for this meeting, for this amazing conversation, for being with us, for watching this video. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and comment on this video. And see you soon in our next episodes. Bye for now.